The phone call came in the small hours, a voice on the line, calm and clinical, describing acts no sane person should ever be able to put into words. He laughed once, almost casually, and said he'd done something terrible for the sake of killing. That offhand sentence settled over the families of 2 women in Cape Coral like a winter fog. Casual, cruel, and completely inexplicable. Please help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The man on that call, Wade Stephen Wilson, would later be convicted of 2 brutal murders that shocked the nation, and yet, inexplicably to many, he would inspire a bizarre, emotional devotion from hundreds of strangers. How did a man who confessed to strangling 2 women within hours of each other become an internet fascination? Why did women online swoon, pledge loyalty, and send hugs and letters to a man behind bars? This is the story not just of a crime, but of the strange alchemy of image, myth, and yearning that can turn a killer into an idol. Christine Milton and Diane Ruiz were ordinary women with ordinary lives. Christine, warm, bright, and remembered by friends for her laughter and loyalty, had routines, people who loved her, and plans no one now could finish. Diane, generous, dependable, a woman who worked hard and treasured her family, left behind friends and relatives who could not reconcile the ease of her daily life with the violence of her death. Their names became headlines, then case files, then, for some, hashtags. Those 2 names, Christine Milton and Diane Ruiz, deserve to be the center of this story. We will always come back to them, to what was stolen from their families, and to the quiet humanity that the true crime industry sometimes obscures beneath spectacle. Cape Coral is not a metropolis. It is a sun-salted city of canals, strip malls, and neighborhoods where people lock their cars and expect to sleep without fear. On October days in 2019, it held ordinary conversations, bar counters, and routine drives. Into that ordinary setting walked a man who would fracture everything. The events that followed, 2 women killed in the same day, seemingly at random, were so senseless that they refused simple explanation. Police, families, and neighbors asked the same questions. Why them? Why him? And how could this happen so close to home? Before the murders that made him infamous, Wilson's life contained pieces that investigators and defense experts later pointed to. One trying to explain his behavior, a troubled past, brushes with the law, and what some experts described as possible neurological and behavioral issues. But explanations are not excuses, and even as experts debated causation, the online reaction would introduce a different, chilling variable: the public's appetite for charisma, mystery, and the dangerous thrill of the forbidden. The timeline is brutal and precise. It helps to hold it in your mind because the coldness of the hours is what makes the violence so impossible to forget. On a fall day in October 2019, the ordinary rhythms of Cape Coral were interrupted. According to prosecutors and court testimony, Christine Milton was found dead in her home after an evening out. Hours later, Diane Ruiz's body was discovered in an empty lot after she had accepted a ride from a stranger. The forensic picture that emerged was staggeringly similar. Both women had been strangled. Both deaths occurred within hours of each other. The randomness of it, meeting someone at a bar, offering a ride to a stranger, then never coming home, made the violence feel arbitrary in the worst possible way. Imagine keystrokes, a bartender wiping down a counter, a woman sliding into a booth, a polite conversation that dissolves into a ride home. That normalcy, that trust, is what the killer exploited. The skill with which an investigator reconstructs scenes is a cold art. Cell tower pings, security camera stills with millisecond timestamps, receipts, and the slow logic of forensics. But what lies behind the evidence are people. The way Christine's sister kept a shirt of hers in a drawer. The birthday cake Diane's mother had bought and now could not serve. The cruelty of the crime was not only in the method but in the theft of future moments, of graduations, of grandchildren, of quiet Sunday mornings. As the investigation unfolded, one detail turned the case into something almost surreal. Wilson, according to reporting and court evidence, made calls and spoke about his deeds in ways that chilled listeners. He admitted to his biological father that he had killed 2 women, and that confession set the legal machinery in motion. What followed was a chain of evidence: phone calls traced, witness statements, and the slow accumulation of physical proof that would be presented in court. But the phone call, the confession in a man's voice that spoke of killing for the sake of killing, haunted the story because it revealed not only action but intent. Police work is often neither cinematic nor clean. It is hours of repetitive labor, interviews that yield little, and the patient stitching together of fragments. In this case, investigators followed a common blueprint: secure the scenes, identify victims, trace the last known movements, and analyze digital traces. First, the crime scenes were processed. DNA fibers and the microscopic detritus of human contact were catalogued. Forensic pathologists examined the bodies and determined cause of death. But unlike a single homicide with a clear motive, these killings appeared random, which made the investigation harder. Detectives pivoted quickly to digital leads, phone records, social media activity, and surveillance footage. It was cell data and witness statements that placed a suspect in the vicinity, and a series of interviews that linked the suspect to the victim's last known interactions. Second, law enforcement pursued interviews and tips. A confession to a family member documented by authorities became a focal point. The call to his father and the father's report to police provided an admission that prosecutors would later use as part of their narrative in court. That confession, paired with the physical evidence investigators had swapped and the emergent forensics, created a mosaic that pointed consistently toward Wilson's involvement. Third, as the evidence mounted, prosecutors prepared for trial. They argued that the killings were intentional and depraved. Defense attorneys countered with alternative explanations: intoxication, drug influence, impulsivity, and even possible neurological impairment. Experts were called to testify about brain scans and how damage might affect judgment, not to excuse the acts, but to explain the defendant's mental state. The interplay between clinical testimony and human narratives of victims and of the community would become the central drama of the courtroom. Throughout, the family members of Christine and Diane sat in the spectator benches of the justice system, forced to watch their grief become evidence. The investigators, for all their technical skill, were always responding to an emotional landscape. Each piece of evidence was, to a degree, an attempt to redeem the stolen future by naming the perpetrator and seeking justice on behalf of the dead. It is tempting to think that the public responds to horrific crimes with unanimous revulsion, but human psychology is messier. Social media acts as an accelerant for weird impulses. The case of Wilson had an uncanny postscript. His heavily tattooed appearance and the viral nature of his images sparked a fan movement online that took many by surprise and many by disgust. Within days of mugshots and courtroom photos circulating, online communities began rallying around him. A subculture of admirers, sometimes called fandoms of killers in modern parlance, emerged, sending letters, money, and declarations of love. Men and women who would never meet him spoke of loyalty, devotion, and romantic interest. His image, chiseled jaw tattoos, an outlaw mystique, collided with cultural narratives about danger and desirability. That collision produced a phenomenon that researchers call hybristophilia, an attraction to people who have committed violent acts. It is a complex mix of taboo, fantasy, and the strange empathy some people feel toward those who present themselves as dangerous. Content creators and platforms amplified the effect. Short-form video ops and comment feeds reduced a terrifying human into a loopable clip or meme. A mugshot, initially used for identification, became a look to swoon over. Media coverage, even when critical, extended the reach of the image. And then came the docuseries, a polished narrative that reframed events for mass audiences, giving the story new life and drawing more attention to the man than to his victims. The paradox is ugly and obvious. The louder the noise about the killer, the quieter the grief for the dead. Why did women and some men respond the way they did? Psychologists and sociologists point to several forces. The eroticization of danger in popular culture. The human tendency to craft narratives around enigmatic figures. And the dissociation that can occur when consuming mediated violence from a safe distance. The truth is uncomfortable. The same platforms that make empathy possible also make myth-making easy. A fan can send a gift without confronting the reality of what the recipient has done. They can project a desire for rescue, transformation, or intimacy onto a person who is, in the stark facts, a murderer. The digital age allows fantasy to masquerade as connection. The courtroom is where the abstract becomes concrete. In June 2024, the jury found Wade Stephen Wilson guilty on counts related to the murders of Christine Milton and Diane Ruiz. The weight of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and admissions coalesced into a verdict: first-degree murder. The jury's finding reflected both the brutality of the crimes and the strength of the evidence. Later in 2024, the jury recommended the death penalty. The sentencing phase moved forward, and the state imposed capital punishment. The legal process did not end there. Appeals and the slow machinery of appellate review would follow, but for the families and the community, the conviction was a formal answer to a terrible question. Courtroom moments were raw. Prosecutors laid out a narrative of callousness and planning. Defense witnesses raised the possibility of impaired judgment, neurological damage, and the influence of substances. To many watching, the prosecution's narrative resonated. The evidence painted a picture of a man who could, according to recorded statements, do the acts again. That claimed lack of remorse hardened public opinion and made the defense's pleas for mitigation less persuasive to a jury seeking accountability. After sentencing, Wilson's case continued to reverberate. He was transferred through the Florida prison system and became a subject of institutional concern due to behavior while incarcerated. Jail incidents, attempts at smuggling, and reported altercations entered the record. Each of these details fed into a larger public mosaic. Here was a man who did not simply vanish after conviction. His life behind bars continued to spark headlines, and the public fascination only deepened the media loop. This loop crime took coverage to Fandom to documentary, crystallized in a 3-part docuseries that examined not only the crimes but the cultural reaction. Handsome devil, charming killer aimed to explain who he was and how the media and myth-making created a peculiar phenomenon, a murder as a celebrity. The documentary's reach turned what had been a local horror into a national conversation about the ethics of true crime entertainment. When scholars try to make sense of why people idolize killers, they look at overlapping causes. First, there's the allure of the taboo. Human beings are drawn to forbidden things. It's a survival soft-wired attention to danger that once helped ancestors avoid predators. In modern culture, taboo becomes titillating rather than lethal. A killer's image can become an avatar for rebellion, a symbol of transgression that absurdly becomes attractive. The spectacle of the courtroom and the public personality of certain defendants can be intoxicating. A man who narrates his own life with bravado, who smiles for the camera, who cultivates an image, makes for more compelling content than faceless headlines. That is part of what happened in this case. An image tagged memed and loop made him into more than a criminal in the public imagination. It made him a character. That character attracted devotion. For all the internet's noise, the real story remains the human one. The families of Christine and Diane, who will always carry the absence. Social media debates and docuseries profits do nothing to bring back birthdays, marriages, and quiet dinners. When a case becomes entertainment, the victims sometimes disappear into the background of an industry that needs protagonists, plot twists, and personalities. Families report reliving trauma with every news cycle. They watch funeral photos become thumbnails. They see pleas for privacy turned into page views. The commercialization of tragedy is a modern ethical dilemma. Content creators justify their work as public service or attention to systemic failures, but the collateral damage is often the diminishing of victim stories for the sake of engagement metrics. Yet it is possible and necessary to consume true crime responsibly. The conviction and sentencing of Wade Stephen Wilson closed a criminal chapter, but it opened broader conversations. In legal terms, his case joined an unfortunate catalog of capital prosecutions in Florida. In cultural terms, it became a teaching moment about the dangers of idolization and about the responsibilities of media and platforms. The families of Christine and Diane, for their part, have advocated for remembering the women beyond the facts of their deaths. Memorials, scholarship funds, and quiet acts of community remembrance have sprung up as small counterweights to the spectacle. But the deeper question we must ask ourselves is not simply why they do it, but what our culture becomes when we let killers turn into characters. The story of Wade Stephen Wilson is a cautionary tale in 3 parts. The cruelty of a senseless crime, the rigor of an investigation that sought truth and accountability, and the strange, unsettling aftermath where image trumped empathy. Christine Milton and Diane Rees were not plot devices. They were women with stories. If this narrative has a moral, it is this: do not let the noise drown out the human voices that deserve to be heard. If you take anything from this episode, let it be a renewed commitment to compassion and discernment. When a headline tempts you to click pause, consider the families. Consider the lives. Consider the consequence of glamorizing violence. And remember that the dead ask little of us, only to be remembered, respected, and to have their stories told with care.